Well, hello everyone. It's DBJ. Welcome to RPG with DBJ, and we are yet again world building. Don't know what makes me do these things, except for the fact that it's just a head full of a lot of ideas and a bunch of creative people out there. I see already Dez. Hey fam, what's going on? Prue, how? Good morning. Good morning. Well, good morning on my end. It's 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here, and if you are someone who stumbled across this channel, I go live demi-daily Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then you can join in the chat whenever you wish. But today we are finally getting into, well as the last 2 days, getting into modern day and starting to flow into science fiction, gaming. And again, we are not just world building for the sake of world building, but like we are selling these time periods to people who pretty much good noon. Yeah. It's actually, I actually find it rather interesting that, just because of time zones, based on where you're at, we can communicate together. We've got pretty good technology to let us do that, and still from around the world, just maintain relationships and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the technology that lets us do it, which means that we're going to have to bring that up too. So, and yeah, I'm just preambling here. People are going to find the link, get involved, that kind of thing. All right. So the last 2 days, we talked about modern day and some storytelling. We had to split up modern day into 2 days because the first one was pretty much about like agents and even a little bit of like superhumans and telling things in today's world. And then yesterday we kind of talked about the horror aspect of it, things getting loose in society, the downfall of society, the what makes a horror environment, being isolated socially where people don't believe you, being isolated physically, like being on a aircraft or a cruise ship or stuck in a building or something. And Joseph Keenan always has some really great insights, but he even brings up a thing like, man, we must be old because I didn't even bring up the fact of being locked down in the building because of an active shooter, right? Terrorist threats and people being locked down and then being in a limited location with someone or something or any combination thereof spreading around. Yeah, Dead Man and Storytellers of Cyberpunk is almost horror. Yeah, if you want to consider it like the destruction of societal, I don't know what we call equilibrium, I suppose. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about cyberpunk and near Earth orbit and what stories we can tell in that, what kind of themes and such. Zevrano Oat says, oh, before I forget, I know this doesn't count as near future, but if you're looking up examples for Western stories, look up the lore of the last word in Destiny. It may be sci-fi, but it's very Western. Oh, you hell, we're going to end up talking about like Firefly, which is very, very Western in its portrayal, but still future. So it's not that we can't, or those things wouldn't be combined with like other themes, like, Western mixing with high technology, or even hell, we've even seen science fiction mixed with medieval in terms of like, nobles and royalty. And Star Wars is absolutely like science fiction fantasy. They've got swords and sorcery. We don't think about it that way, but it's swords and sorcery, or at least a small cadre of people know it. So but there's something about cyberpunk that makes it a little bit different than everything else. And so very, very quickly, like, I don't know, last 3 or 4 minutes, and because it's a genre that I love, what is it that makes something cyberpunk? So the first thing I think that makes something cyberpunk is that Technology is ubiquitous. It is technology is everywhere. It has become not just where everyone has access to it, but that even that old technology is something that anyone can get their hands on. I mean, you can just imagine junkyards filled with like robot pieces and old fusion reactors and that kind of stuff. Zevron says the destruction of privacy, human rights, and the economy is very cyberpunk fears. The there isn't a middle class is another thing. So you got a lot of technology, meaning like just look up any of the actual plays that were released from the most recent Cyberpunk. I think it's called 2077 video game. That'll even give you a huge image of Cyberpunk is like. Deadman says even the bums have smartphones. Yeah. In Cyberpunk, like it's nothing to see citizens with a cyber arm or cyber optics. Most people have some sort of firearm on them. They're used to rampant crime, and the PCs, while they are the quote unquote heroes of the story, they in the beginning they aren't that much special. There would be street gangs who might have cloaking devices that they can wear, or there are hacker enclaves of like 50 or more that live in abandoned arcologies, which there's something like that. Zevron08 says, I have PDFs of the old Cyberpunk Chromebooks. They're basically just shopping books for augmentations for your character, weapons, vehicles, etc. They're great. Yeah, I have the reprint of the original Cyberpunk 2020, the R. Talsorian. Yeah, and it's a deadly game. So that's yet another thing, right? Cyberpunk is very deadly. Life is cheap. People get killed all the time. There are like organ leggers that kill people or find people that have a lot of financial debt and collect from them, so that nearly everything has a price. So there would be people who would collect their debts from you and take back their cyber arm or that artificial liver or even that heart that's pumping in your chest because you didn't make your last payment, and they shut the heart down with a tracker in it, and someone comes there with a bloody mono knife and cuts it out of your chest and puts it back in a case and leaves with it. There's even shooting Cyberpunk, there was a Ario meat wagon. And so there were these aerodyne ships that would fly around, and if you were killed, and they could detect whether your heartbeat was failing or what have you, that there would just be these like repo men, there's these repo men going around like taking back those cyber optics that you paid for. So I mean, and we've seen any number of like graphic novels and movies and books that had to deal with cyberpunk world, where it's not necessarily post-apocalyptic. It's more or less people living in very destitute situations and just being used to it. People walking around with gas masks on because there's factories belching out, poison things, and it's always crowded. Hell, even the beginning, if you've ever seen the opening scene of the movie Avatar, the theatrical version, it was cut. The television version, they actually put it back in, and there's just a scene where it's just like it's my gaming group always called it brown down, where it's like it's not really rain, it's more like this brownish, nasty, oily substance that kind of falls from the sky. And sometimes it's not even rain, it's just you're living in such tall cities that it's just the moisture condensing and just falling out of the sky like rain. Prue says, is he dead? Not dead enough, right? And so much of it is our brains being linked in with technology as well, such as Cyberpunk Day, Rickard. Where interface plugs are a big thing in Cyberpunk, where you pull out your cables, you shove it in your temple or the back of your head, or maybe into your wrist or something, or into your neck. I've even seen versions of Cyberpunk where the person's eye comes out and you could stick a plug in it, and then you plug it into a gun or a weapon or a vehicle or something. And hacktivists, I suppose, computer hackers that are trying to break into corporate mainframes, and just because not everything is quote unquote online, that you have to literally be on. You have to be at the locations oftentimes to like hack into places and stuff, and that's where Shadowrun really has lived a little bit longer than traditional Cyberpunk, just because it has trolls and magic in it and stuff like that. So everyone says, DBJ, you were you're a rules lawyer when playing Cyberpunk. I let my players basically become purely mechanical. I know it just went against the rules, but I figured they had the cash and it was awesome. Yeah, I wasn't a real big rules lawyer. We trashed Cyberpunk and that whole game system. I mean, we loved it. And if you were a child of the mid 80s, that was a thing. Yeah. Thanks, Prue. Dead Man Storyteller says Night Flyers had a plug in the lady's arm. Yeah, and if you ever see Cyberpunk images, you'll see someone with like a single cyber arm, maybe some tattoos, and that ubiquitous cable attached to some kind of mechanical device, probably a cyber optic or two. There was Mirror Shades was a book. Walter John Williams was the oracle of Cyberpunk at its time as a writer, and so there was a character in it named Molly Millions. Well, she went by different things: Molly Millions, Debbie Diamonds, a couple of things, but Molly Millions was the name she held for a long time, and she had cyber implants that were just mirrored lenses over where her eyes should be, and she had long like red fingernails that were they were hardened like titanium fingernails that she could kill people with, and she was like a badass character in the stories, and she would show up every once in a while, and everyone's walks around with like an attitude, and there's this weird verbal intonations where everyone talks in very short clipped methods, using a lot of slang, this portrayal that no one has a care in the world, almost like, if there's danger, whatever, you only live as long as you can. And everybody wants to get from, there's like this one last score mentality where no one lives in security unless you're one of the 1%. And the 1% are just ultra rich. They usually live in orbital habitats, floating cities at the top of, the 500-story buildings that go into the clouds or something. And the PCs are never any of those ultra rich. They're always being hired by them, trying to take them down, trying to have one last score that will give them enough money for them to live like kings and queens, that kind of thing. Yeah. Existence. Yeah. Tesla Ranger says biological cyber decks. Zevron08 says everyone looked like they were in the Matrix before the Matrix existed. Everyone had their black leather duster with the katana. Of course, black leather dusters were a thing, right? And they were made out of diamond-like material to make it the best katana. Yeah, it was always like some kind of carbon diamond steel or something with a mono blade to it, or like vibro blades or something. That's just a thing, And Dead Man says Shadowrun had an option to take mirror covers or chrome finish with cyber eyes, right? And that's one other thing. Prue says those nails make a great fighter, but a horrific lesbian lover. Yeah, don't get too wild because you might shred your partner to death. You'd have, well, I don't know. I think you'd probably have to invest in some sort of like glove-like material or something, or just you're just going to have to be the person that's like, yeah, I guess I'm just going to have to strap my arms down and hope that my partner gives me what I want. Although if you have interface plugs, I'm sure there's technology where you could just like plug into each other's heads, and that might actually be better. You never know. So, um, yet one more thing for Cyberpunk is this idea that, let's see if I that there's always the mega corporations, these unfeeling, monstrous, corporations are the bad guy kind of thing, and corporations that hire you and stick an explosive piece of rice in the back of your head, and if you leave them and don't do their research, it'll explode. Or research facilities where they're doing human testings on the homeless that are everywhere, that kind of thing. Yeah, Rickard says, I have to confess, as much as I like Cyberpunk, I've always been a champion for the post-Cyberpunk settings. I'm assuming you mean the settings where it's not quite where every technology's everywhere, and you've got like Ripper Docs doing, inserting cybernetic implants in like dirty warehouses kind of thing. Like before that, yeah, Johnny Mnemonic is the type. I'm not sure. Cthulhu Punk, yeah. Ooh, nasty. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Like Rickard says, think Cyberpunk, but the world isn't crap. I suppose today would be that. There is a comfort with technology that is Cyberpunk. So, for example, today we have cybernetic. We have artificial limbs, but they aren't quite equal to the level of what we wouldn't say it would be normal in terms of feeling and the ability to use them. But we're right around the corner from that. Yeah, Cthulhu tech, BattleTech mixed with Cthulhu is a thing, and Cthulhu Punk is a thing. Always Cthulhu, always delving into things that we shouldn't. Knowledge that we shouldn't. Where we shouldn't go. Excuse me. But one of the things in Cyberpunk, and we've often seen this in role-playing games, where it's like you can't play a game with all criminals or all evil people, an evil campaign. And Cyberpunk literally is essentially people being evil, right? These are individuals that are have ambiguous moral compasses. Most of the time, you're committing crimes, even though those crimes might be against oppressive regimes and evil corporations and things. But a lot of the players are. Whoa, shit, Kitty, really? At least ask first. Wow. Sophie's, be nice. I love you, Kitty, but wow. Sorry, I didn't give. I'm supposed to give 3 minutes and 42 seconds of head rubbies, and I think I only gave like 3 minutes and 8 seconds. She's coming to collect her 32 seconds of extra head rubbies. Yeah, Kitty. All right, we're doing Cyberpunk today. Yeah, we are. So, Cyberpunk, Zevron says, yeah, cat meowing like crazy. Yeah, that's her. Zevron says, Cyberpunk is the exception to that no one can be evil in your party trope. For the most part, because in Cyberpunk, everyone is at least, at the minimum, they're selfish. For the most part, they fall towards the ambiguous, committing, tortures and murder and assaults on, I would say, relatively speaking, innocent people. Yeah. Prue says she did ask repeatedly. Yeah. Tesla Ranger brings up Mexican Cthulhu equals Pacific Rim. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Kaiju and the Jaegers and all that kind of stuff. We're going to get to that. That's going to be another day. When we get into a little more high tech. Yeah, Zevron 08 says at the minimum they are against the oppressors and will do do what it takes. And unfortunately, doing what it takes is always a slippery slope. You know, when you're trying to fight, when you have limited resources, you're trying to fight against oppressors. It's like there's always one person who's like, well, we need to do what it takes, but we're you know, what's the song? I will do anything, but I won't do that. And there's always one person that's like, yeah, I think I will do that. Rickard brings up Ghost in the Shell, Minority Report, RoboCop, the newest Deus Ex have elements of post Cyberpunk. No, Deus Ex Machina machine, Deus Ex, yeah, the Deus Ex Machina. About to say role-playing games. Role-playing video games are absolutely cyberpunk. I mean, even in it, you know, the guy's got the cyber limbs, and you can. I think I've got one of those games right here. Cyber limbs and the upgrades in the arm and hiding the weapons inside of them, and being able to, you know, touch mechanical things and download information and whatnot. And a lot of cyberpunk deals with the cyberpunk stories deal with technology, like Black Mirror, for example, in Netflix. It deals with the what if, taking technology and just pushing it just a little further, almost like the dark side of what technology would be. For example, like you guys brought up the elimination of privacy, the elimination of the blending of mind and machine with the growing of AI and that kind of thing. Not quite transhumanist yet, but the idea that, like in RoboCop, one of the best things in RoboCop that is not given a lot of credit is the corporate mentality in RoboCop, right? This is a nasty Detroit. The police force can't take care of itself. The corporation, OCP, wants to come in and basically, you know, turn the police into a profit margin thing. And you've got the corporate boardroom guys, you know, arguing with each other. Somebody gets blown away in the corporate boardroom, and one guy's like, oh, well, I guess there's an opening. You know what I mean? I mean, it's the callousness of it, rampant homelessness and drugs and stuff like that. So it can be. Zevron08 says that trailer for Deus Ex called Mechanical Apartheid was heavy. Yeah, and so Cyberpunk can be I would say Cyberpunk can be a heavy setting in itself. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the concept of a noir setting, but Cyberpunk is very noir. You know, Blade Runner, all the Blade Runner iterations are noir, which basically means that there is a darkness because it always seems like it's raining. It seems like the sun never comes up. It feels dirty and drab, and there doesn't seem to be much hope, but noir, yeah, Cyberpunk, Zevron agrees, Cyberpunk is very noir. Noir settings, strangely enough, they do have hope, but they come in the form of very small bits, almost like a dark gray black painting with a small dab of like yellow or white, right? For example, you can't save everyone, but maybe there's a small orphan kid, and for some reason your character befriends this small orphan kid, and you just want to see them have a better life. Or there's always the idea of very classic idea, the down on his luck drunk detective that is barely living paycheck to paycheck and falls in love with the woman who's the femme fatale. She's a stripper or something, or she's being beaten by her pimp or whatever, and he just has to save her, right? And he doesn't really want to. There's like a more of an emotional relationship with maybe this other person, and he just wants to kick their ass. Very much like the movie Equalizer, right? Here's this young girl's getting beaten, and Denzel Washington's just like, I just don't even want this to be part of my life, but she needs to be saved. And then when you find out that she gets her beaten and she's in the hospital, he's like, I'm gonna have to kick somebody's ass. And that's very much a cyberpunk thing, right? It's not saving everyone, it's saving the light of hope with one person. Zevron says this was why lights in noir films or comics are from cigarettes or matches. There's a small light in the darkness, but it's enough. Right. It's the I've lost hope, but there's a small speck of light. And it's very much so. There's always a character who's looking at or listening to an old recording of a lost loved one. Maybe they have dog tags from when they were in the war and they just remember the fun times they had with their war buddies, and they have a photograph of like all of them standing together, that kind of thing. There's always that kind of stuff. Bruce says it definitely can be. I'd call Snow Crash cyberpunk, and that doesn't fall under noir in my opinion. No, but I would say Snow Crash does fall under it. Oh, the opening. You guys gotta read Snow Crash. Hero protagonist is the name of the character who's driving around basically like a hyper Lamborghini for a pizza company. Enzo's Pizzas, your pizza in 30 minutes or else. Anyway, great opening, man. Great opening. Yeah, I would love to drive around in a black Lamborghini with for pizza deliveries and stuff like that, driving through people's houses and neighborhoods and stuff just to get them their pizza. Deadman says, like in Babylon AD, where Vin Diesel's character is supposed to escort the young girl to a new location. Yeah, absolutely. And how dark was that world, right? And this young girl represents kind of like the innocence that might still exist, and of course the movie ends with a little bit of hope. Hell, the movie 7 isn't cyberpunk, but is very noir. It's always raining, it's always dark, and the light doesn't come until the end of the movie when everything is exposed. Oh, for near future cyberpunk, Total Recall 2070. That was a weird show. I never finished it, and it wasn't quite Total Recall that we know from the movies, but yeah, great, very much cyberpunk. Prue says it is brilliant. I love it, and yes, the opening is what it's worth a life. Yeah. Snow Crash, man. It's a hero protagonist living out of a. If I'm not mistaken, he was living out of a storage container or storage locker in one of those storage locker campuses and stuff. There's also, as everyone says, as much as I enjoy cyberpunk, when are we talking about Firefly? My current D&D campaign is a Spelljammer Firefly-like world, so that topic would be very helpful. Yeah, it'll probably be tomorrow or Friday. I'm pretty sure we'll probably hit on it when we talk about it. So don't worry, we're going to get there. We will. Okay, so the sorry, distracted me a little bit. The idea also in cyberpunk is that there's this weird mix of trash and high tech, right? Yeah, you got me. You squirreled me, dude. Or young lady or whatever. The idea that, like I mentioned earlier, where there's like trash heaps full of like robot parts. The character in Snow Crash living in a storage container park or something with other people who've run power lines, and they've got like heaters and electricity inside of it. In the movie Johnny Mnemonic, people are literally living on the Golden Gate Bridge and turned it into a homeless enclave or whatnot. It's in the movie Fifth Element, there's people who are living below the cloud line in these giant cities, and there's this weird mix of it. There's another movie, Elysium. Not the best execution, but in the movie Elysium, there are basically street thugs who know how to. They know surgery, and they're computer hackers, and they've got all the face tats and stuff, but they're kind of like their own family and community, and they're walking around with AK-47s with like lasers attached to them and stuff. Yeah. Prue says trash and high tech is the perfect alternate name for cyberpunk. No, it's got to rhyme. It's got to be like, yeah, trash and tech. Yeah, trash tech. There's a ton of that. Even in the second Pacific Rim movie, this young lady makes her own Jaeger robot out of trash heaps from the other destroyed mechas over the course of the many years fighting the kaiju. Right? There's a lot of trash tech in Cyberpunk as well. And okay, so we've got to not come up with, but we have to talk about the adventures. So the primary motivating factor in Cyberpunk is money. It is just the thing. Everyone lives from one score to the next, and everything is super expensive. Bringing up Snow Crash again, they make fun of current day economics where there are warnings not to keep flushing down the $10,000 bills in the toilets because they keep clogging up the toilets. Like that's how worthless money it ends up becoming because inflation has gone so high, right? So there's this idea that, inflation's out of control. Most people are living basically score to score, but there's a little bit of a dreaming going on where if you can just get to go up the gravity well, that was a big thing, going up the gravity well, that escaping Earth's gravity would allow you to like get angel wings. And I don't mean that really, but there's this idea that, everyone is stuck on Earth, even though we have the technology and the means to leave Earth. Not everyone can leave it. And there are those who are living in space, and somehow, some way, they are the ones who are living out of this cesspool. Total Recall 2070, Rickard says, is more Blade Runner show with some minor recall things added in. Yeah, I think absolutely it is. It's television's version of Blade Runner more than specifically Total Recall. But, well, okay, Total Recall, the movie based on the short story, is about like living. If you could plug yourself into an alternate a VR world and become like a super spy that saves the life of the people that live on Mars or something like that, and then the person wakes up and it's like, are they living the dream or is it real? Right? So one part of Cyberpunk that you can play with is the idea that there are technologies that are a little bit out of control, and they are neither good nor bad, right? So there are technologies which, like virtual reality, might become addictive, but yet virtual reality could also help people overcome trauma, right? It's just basically a lot of gray area and not a lot of preachiness, if that makes sense. There may be someone who comes up with life extension technologies, but they have to harvest it out of the glands of children or something, right? Altered carbon would be considered cyberpunk. I would agree. Although some would say that altered carbon is closer to transhumanism, but the world that Altered Carbon is in is absolutely cyberpunk. Absolutely. The cortical stack idea, the putting people on ice, the very easy cybernetic implantation, having wired reflexes and wired muscles and those kind of things, physical improvements in hearts and livers and kidneys and all that kind of stuff was in Altered Carbon kind of. And so I absolutely agree, because the main character had a body that was his brain was implanted into a body that had been focused on like combat or something. So he had like higher reflexes, greater strength, higher endurance and whatnot. And the cop that was his partner, she lost her arm, and she ended up getting a cyber arm pretty easily. So yeah, very much cyberpunk. People living in the streets. Prue says, to be honest, I'm woefully uneducated in cyberpunk, even if my second tabletop RPG played was Shadowrun. I don't really have a feeling for cyberpunk beyond pure surface. And cyberpunk was of its era, because I was an 80s kid, and it was of its era. But cyberpunk today, I suppose, the only difference with yeah, cyberpunk plus, yeah, Dead Man says, and even Rickard says, just is this it's basically, most of us are downtrodden and poor, and there's only a few that are really living the dream of what technology would give us. The rest of us have the technology around us, but it's not giving us the dream. And in this triggered society of people wanting to be separated by borders and by culture, cyberpunk was very much like, it was nothing to have a character whose first name was Irish, whose middle name was Chinese, whose last name was Latin American, but they looked African, right? You know what I mean? There was a blending. There's a huge blending of races and cultures, and there was no such thing really as third world countries anymore. They basically, most third world countries rose up to the level of the downtrodden bigger nations, and a lot of those nations, United States was not a big thing in cyberpunk. It was the fall of the democratic nations in many ways, so that these smaller countries always had they became greater. There was no pinnacle nation any longer, and the smaller nations became broader in scope. So for example, it was nothing to see people walking around with Polynesian tattoos living in, I don't know, England or Madagascar or Central America, and the blending of cultures and stuff. Prue says, thanks. I've always had trouble pinpointing cyberpunk as soon as it strays just the tiniest bit from the absolute classic expression. And Prue says, I've never really thought about that for real. That is awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, cyberpunk in that time period was a time when we thought about like nuclear holocaust. Late 70s, early 80s, there was a bit of those fears, and there was these fears of United States, China, Russia, Europe being at the pinnacle of society, and how so many other countries were being abused by them at the time, that cyberpunk was the flip version of that the smaller nations actually became far more important. Like, hey, if you wanted those cyber eyes, you really need to go to Burma or whatever, and you'd go to Burma or the Philippines, or somewhere in, I don't know, some Bermuda island or something, and it was just as high tech as any other place, right? There was no difference. And so that's very much about cyberpunk as well, that there weren't economic differences any longer, but we were all living in the same cesspool. Ricker says, I kind of hate Sweden and Shadowrun. Why couldn't we get in on the cyberpunk? Leave it alone. Yeah. Condor DM says, it'd be interesting to imagine a world that somehow remained how it is now, but advanced, of course. Yeah, without the whole, cyberpunk's very noir, it's always raining and dark. It doesn't necessarily need to be that way, but the idea of technology impacting how we live is a huge part of cyberpunk. Condor DM says, a game or story starts at the point of the beginning of a world war that will tear everything apart, but again, the story starts at the beginning of the war. Yeah. Hell, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the original Cyberpunk 2013, which also advanced to 2020, was a war where the United States went to war with like Central and South America, and then the United States went bankrupt and left all the soldiers down there, and they literally had to walk back. And by the time they got back to the United States, they were all disillusioned with the remnants of what the government was like, or what remained of the government at that time. So, I mean, there is that idea that like there are like these skirmish wars all over the world. People are involved in them, but no one remembers why we're fighting in the first place. It's just fighting for survival's sake to keep a hold of what you own. Yeah, be a part of destruction of everything we know. Yeah, we talked about post-apocalypse because we're going to talk about that as well. Not yet. We haven't gotten the post-apocalypse yet. We did pre-apocalypse, strangely enough, but yeah, we're going to get there. Zevron08 says, we already live in a world where hackers outthink the government with current tech. Imagine when hackers can connect to people with augmentations. And that's a thing in Cyberpunk, right? The hacker who's inside the brain of the agents who are breaking into the corporate mainframes to find the names of the individuals that they've been I don't know, like experimenting on, and then you find out the experiments get loose and these innocent people are rampaging and you still have to kill them even though they don't want to die, but maybe they're begging to be killed because their bodies are now augmented and they're forced to it's the layers of darkness and hope that are layered on top of one or another. Yeah, Bruce would continue to say, I don't know why it feels so exclusive to me. I think maybe it's because I want it to somehow be more than it is. Yeah, it's a lot of Cyberpunk has to do with taking missions to get money. And a lot of times it does devolve, especially Shadowrun devolves down into blowing things up. But really, most of those stories are about saving someone's morality, saving their souls more than anything. Spectral, yes. Oh, a great Netflix. Check it out if it's in your area. Check out Spectral. Very much Cyberpunk, even though you could relate it to the Cyberpunk horror side of it, like the Cyberpunk Cthulhu mix blending. But yeah, Spectral is very great. You at first you think there's like ghosts, you realize there's a technological component to it and such. Yeah, Zevron says, my players took a chemical that could allow other chemicals to be passed through the skin. Yep. They put it on politicians and businessmen and made them hooked to their cure drugs. That's a big modern day thing that we think of Cyberpunk. The idea that there's a disease or outbreak and only a certain company has the cure for it, or not even a cure, but you need to pay for injections that alleviate the symptoms of this disease, and if you don't pay them, you die. Yeah, Deadvin, the storyteller, says DMSO is a real chemical. Yeah, DMSO is a chemical that allows other chemicals to pass through the skin. Yeah, DMSO, and there was a Cyberpunk. No, sorry, there was a Shadowrun book for biotechnology, and it had DMSO in it. So all you had to do, it's the idea from Star Trek where a drug is just injected by just pressing it against the skin and just using a little pneumatic spray, just and presses through the skin, and it's instantly into your bloodstream. Yeah. The hard part of Cyberpunk, and as we start getting into higher technology, is having knowledge about the technology that exists and incorporating it into the game. It's very similar to classic Dungeons and Dragons, where we tend to lose sight of the fact that, yes, we know that the player characters have magic, but what about everybody else, right? Why doesn't the king have an anti-magic field around him in his, court area? Why doesn't he have scrying, right? So in Cyberpunk, while the PCs are running around with automatic weapons and they're all cybered up and they have wired reflexes, there's also that technology everywhere else, right? Why wouldn't the crime lord might have two hackers that are always looking at, in the data sphere or whatever it's called, the web, the net or whatever it is, making sure that they're protecting using mechanical automated defense systems or something like that, right? It's the idea of remembering that technology exists, what that technology is, and its impact on society. And it can be a little daunting if you're not familiar with it. I can see that. Yeah, Zevron says the problem with cyberpunk is where is the line? What keeps it from stepping into sci-fi? I'll tell you that there really isn't much of a line, right? It is the line is going to be based on where you think that line should be, or that line might keep getting blurred, and that might be the theme. So, is cloning a thing? I don't know. Or downloading the brain and being able to download yourself into another body. Is that cyberpunk? That's a weird line as well. Faster than light travel and energy weapons do not ever seem to be a cyberpunk thing, Deadman. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist or that you shouldn't have it, but there's always this idea that it's just modern day weapons cranked up to 11. Modern slug throwers, but without clips. What do you call that? It is like maybe needler weapons or like rocket launchers or micro rocket launchers or something like that, but energy weapons and faster than light travel, not that you couldn't create that setting, but the two don't seem to mix. Usually it's based on, it's like a Black Mirror thing, right? It's like, what would technology be like today if it got out of control and lots of money and major corporations were able to abuse it, and the average citizen is in the crossfire. There's a movie called Stranger Days, and this is kind of dark. In Stranger Days, there was a technology, I think they were called squids, and the technology allowed you to experience the experiences of someone else. So if someone was a skydiver, you didn't have to skydive, but you could put on a squid. It was basically like a plastic thing over your head, and you could feel what it feels like to skydive. Well, you guys know, and I know you're already thinking it like I am, you can get pretty dark, right? So you start experiencing people having, sexual encounters. And then you start switching over. So if you were a guy, you could put one on and experience what it's like to be female. And then there's a person in the movie, Stranger Days, who's a killer and enjoys killing people, and then puts squids on the people he's killing so they feel his enjoyment while he's killing them. Then he records their enjoyment of him killing them while they're panicking, seeing themselves through his eyes, and then sells those on the black market. Right? That's very much cyberpunk. It's technology taken to the worst. Everyone says, to continue my previous comment, eventually the players got in trouble and a private military tried to kill them with DMSO cyanide. They shot each other with what were basically squirt guns. That's nasty. That's nasty. Cyanide squirt guns. Ooh. Prue says, basically I've read straight sci-fi books where there have been very cyberpunky descriptions in certain areas, but we can say that cyberpunk is always urban in nature, right? Yeah, very much urban. Anything that isn't urban in cyberpunk is a rarity, and the urban sprawl bumps up against it. As a matter of fact, there's quite a few RPG supplements called the sprawl, or derivations thereof. And it's the idea that cities just keep spreading wider and taller, spreading out into the ocean, spreading out, high-rise buildings with, aerial ships around them. And it's extremely urban. Yeah, no grass, no trees. The Great Squirt Gun War lasted 2 months. That's awesome. That's awesome. Rickard says, for me, Cyberpunk is more technology creating inequality and failed to deliver on the hope of the aid it would give. Hell yeah, I like that. You need a t-shirt. Coupled with the dystopia where the world is controlled by evil corporations mostly. Right. And unfortunately, the trope of the evil corporations controlling everything comes about because the player characters tend to want to become one of those, become one of those elite, and they end up becoming the enforcers so that they can keep what is theirs and keep everybody down, because everybody's a crab in a barrel. And yes, technology creates inequality and failed to deliver on the hopes and aid that it would bring. Right. It's, we're going to create technologies that are going to feed everyone, and find out that it's just, recycling dead people or something. Right. That's cyberpunk. That is a cyberpunk thing. Nephorite says, Prue, yeah, urban is an anchor. Akira. Oh, why didn't I think of Akira? Akira is pretty rooted in the core of cyberpunk, street level, noir, consciousness expansion, body horror, biotech, but gets wider in theme and apocalyptic. Yeah. Akira is absolutely cyberpunk. High-tech motorcycle and gangs running around in a slightly rebuilt Japan or Neo Japan, yeah, very much so. Corporations doing experiments on children to maybe discover psionic ability, maybe whatever the hell that is. Yeah. Oh yeah. Bruce is delightfully nasty. Yeah. I didn't make that up. That's in the movie, but it's pretty nasty, right? It's the dream. I absolutely agree with Rickard, where it's like there's this dream that that technology would bring you to the promise of solving things, and then someone just comes along and just abuses the hell out of it. The Go Gangs in Akira, yeah. Yeah, Zevron says, to this day, we pay remembrance to it. It's next week, Wednesday. We get together, have a moment of silence, and then watch Judge Dredd. Yo, hell, yeah, Ghost in the Shell is absolutely cyberpunk. Not just Judge Dredd, which is all right. The movie Dredd, the follow-up to it. Oh, absolutely. It all takes place in just one building. The movie, The Raid Redemption, very much cyberpunk-ish. Not a lot of high technology, but criminals taking over a city block and just living out of the city block, and the cops can barely do anything about it. Yeah. Ghost in the Shell is a 50-50 with post cyberpunk, if we want to go down that rabbit hole. Yep. Absolutely. And so it is a very much an abuse of technology. And then you could say technology is the equivalent of making a pact with the devil in a more modern or medieval setting. And here's what I mean. It is the only way to get justice, and the only way to find hope is to make a deal with the devil. And so it is the technology becomes that deal with the devil. A big part of cyberpunk, strangely enough, is the more technology you fuse with yourself, you lose a bit of your humanity. That's not necessarily a real thing, but whatever. I mean, in terms of what we think of today, but in cyberpunk, that is a thing. The more technology you fuse with yourself, the more your humanity goes down, the more uncaring you become. But at the same time, you need to do that to get an edge to live in this world, so you can have one more score to find that little bit of hope. Rickard says Ghost in the Shell isn't a dystopia, and technology did save the world in many ways. You even have the main protagonist trying to protect society rather than trying to tear it down. Very rare, but it does happen in cyberpunk, where everything isn't trashed. that you might be an agent of protecting society versus trying to tear it down. And uh, yeah, Zevron brings up the fact that you become a cyber psycho, basically the Borg. Yeah. You become emotionless, apathetic to things, maybe sociopathic, psychopathic, etc. Nephrite says there's also MPD Psycho, which kind of hits transhumanism without going off planet, but stays noir and is really about using genetics in a tech sense, humans as hard drives for consciousness. Yet, more recently than in the classic cyberpunk, there's a lot more biotechnology and the idea of the downloading of consciousness, the manipulation of consciousness, losing your memory, waking up and losing your memory and finding out that your memories are like 15 years old is a very cyberpunk thing. Waking up and finding out that you were killed 5 years ago or last month or something, and hunting down the people who killed you is a very cyberpunk thing. A lot of the stories take place. It's very few cyberpunk stories are about changing society. You can't really change the society, but it is saving a small family, saving the children, keeping certain people safe, trying to get people to a safe location in the outskirts of society, outside the big city, so that they can live on their own in a farm or something. That is a very cyberpunk-ish theme. And so it's just snatching hope out of the jaws of depression, because it's a very dark setting, very much so. Ricker says in some versions of Ghost in the Shell, the world isn't any worse than it is today, but you have elements that want to abuse the system to try and create a cyberpunk world, and you also have smaller issues. The movies, however, are way more cyberpunk, and I absolutely agree with that. There's sometimes anytime you read a book or a graphic novel, you can go into far more detail than a movie. A movie's got on average 2 hours to draw you in, tell the story, and end it some kind of way. So they've got to hit harder and faster and make it a lot more dramatic, a lot more distance between dark and light, good and evil. You know what I mean? But yeah, the idea of people wanting to live in a virtual reality versus the real world, and when the virtual reality world becomes better than the real world and stuff. So yeah, there are those things. Hey babe, love you. Have a good one. I know it's going to be rainy today. Bruce says I've mostly seen the animated movies. Yes, and Ghost in the Shell is set shortly after World War III. And you know what? A lot of cyberpunk is always set after some kind of catastrophe happens, or there's the threat of like orbital bombardment, corporations becoming more powerful than governments. And I believe in Cyberpunk 2013 and 2020 that the corporations, the mega corporations, actually used orbital what do you call it, mass drivers, to send orbital rocks or materials down to Earth to wipe out some uprising or something, and it pretty much cemented the corporations as like, governments, nah, corporations, yes. That's also a thing too, stopping the orbital bombardments or surviving something that happened in this World War III post-apocalyptic thing where some kind of neural disease was released, or chemical warfare was used, or a lot of the PCs tend to be ex-military and are survivors of these lost wars, where people were just they find out that there's no difference between their enemies. And sometimes they just not throw their weapons down physically, but like they're just like, I give up, man. I'm not even going back home. Or like I said before, like running out of money. These two governments go to war and they forgot about them. Dead Man says the Thor shot satellites. Yeah, absolutely. It's the orbital elevators are a thing. Going into space up elevators, and I didn't bring up this fact of having a robust orbital society with space stations and people leaving the gravity well and living in space. A lot of times in cyberpunk, while the 1% are the riches, you need people to do the dirty work. So a lot of those who consider themselves to be the minorities of the world end up being the ones who are the mechanics, the ones who to clean up the messes and stuff. So yeah, cynicism abounds everywhere. It's just a thing in the cyberpunk theme. And so you're going to have a lot of like this is very common, where you have a lot of what I would consider and forgive me, but ghettos around the world become the ghettos in space, right? It's the place where when you're downtrodden, that's your safe zone, if that makes sense. And those downtrodden ghettos of all types end up becoming the places where you end up actually being embraced as family, because everyone is still the same way. If you're poor enough, color and culture doesn't matter anymore, because everyone looks at each other like, yeah, we're all in the same place, and everyone gets the head nod like, what's up? Like, you know that you're that way. And if you live in a poor community and there are, for example, it is primarily made up of one culture or race, you understand that whenever you see other people of other different races and cultures, you look at them and you're just like you look at them like, yeah, like I grew up in primarily, I don't live there now, but I grew up in a primarily African-American community, and the white people that live there, you gave them the head nod like, I know why you live here, because your life is just as effed up as the rest of us. So what's up? Like, there's no hate. It's like the embracing of that. And so a lot of cyberpunk is very brown-ish, in the downtrodden places. Yeah, ghettos in space is a thing. Yeah, it's the, the rich people live in the really sweet, all white, gleaming gold and silver chrome space station. And then there's these other space stations that were like lashed together with, strangely enough, like leftover space station pieces, and people live there with like, ladies with bald heads and dudes with long dreadlocks that are like Chinese and Ethiopian and Central American, all living together, of this weird genetic mishmash of people. That's a very cyberpunk thing as well, where I could go on and on, but yeah, I tried to describe it as best as possible. And let's not forget, there's a lot of gunfights. There's a shit ton of gunfights. So there's a lot of getting your arms blown off, getting shot, flatlining, and then having your heart started because somebody else ripped out a smart patch and threw it over your chest to get your heart started again. There's a lot of like there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on as well. So very bloody, very violent, very much apathetic. Even when you have feelings, there's this idea that you're not supposed to show your feelings for fear of being seen weak. So yeah, there is a lot of like quiet cynicism, with everyone hiding their own, holding on to their humanity, but they're hiding it down deep. And so yeah, there's a lot of that as well. Well, anyway, guys, we've of course hit the hour mark. My kitty has left me because she got upset. I did give her some head scratchies. We also have Tia here, my deaf cat. Oh, she can't see me. I was gonna bring her up here, but guys, thank you very much for joining me. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the solar system, exploring our solar system. Yes, Prue says people in the lower parts of society are often pushed towards either apathy or almost manic entrepreneurship. It is literally a manic entrepreneurship. It's all, everyone is trying to hustle. there is no such thing as getting a job. No one has a job. Everyone has something to sell, and sometimes that salesmanship is themselves. That goes always in any time. Yeah, no, yeah. Everyone is chronically underemployed, and so if the only skills you have is firing a gun, then that's it. It's the I'm not a doctor, but I learned it out of a textbook kind of thing. I learned it online. Hackers that never went to school, but they're 13 years old, but they're these like major hackers or something. Like there's a ton of that in Cyberpunk, and so this constant need to hustle is a thing. And most NPCs in the world are consummate hustlers. They're fixers. They all have 3 or 4 skills that they know, and they know a guy who knows a guy, and there's always that. I can go on and on. So, guys, thank you very much. We're going to talk about the solar system next, about exploring the solar system. We're probably going to it's going to blend a little cyberpunkish, but we'll probably touch on Firefly and how sometimes I think our solar system is undersold in game settings. So the idea of space stations, elevators, colonizing Mars and Saturn, and not just Saturn, the moons around Saturn and Jupiter and Venus, and the stories that we can tell in that, and why should we, and where we can go with that. And then we'll flow from there into transhumanism, which is more wish fulfillment in society, where the idea of what bebop, is half solar system, half transhumanist kind of things. I think transhumanism is more sociological, the disappearance of what it means to be human and what it means to have a society versus bebop. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. So that's going to be tomorrow, and then Friday we'll do the transhumanist thing, and then we're going to go beyond that and go into like exploring the cosmos, going outside of our own solar system, other galaxies, alien empires, and that kind of stuff. The Star Treks, the Star Warses, and then maybe try to see if we can talk anything beyond that, which is kind of weird because then you start getting societies that are like creating Dyson sphere swarms and moving galaxies and dismantling suns and stuff like that. I don't know if you could have a role-playing game with that, but we could talk about it too. So guys, have a good one. I'll see you later. Babylon 5. Yes, hell yeah. Babylon 5. I can't forget Babylon 5. Please remind me of that. Please. Yeah, Star Wars and Star Trek isn't the only sci-fi story out there. Babylon 5, Stargate, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll see you guys later. Everyone, have a good one. Thank you for joining me.